Old money aristocrats once laughed off wristwatches as nothing more than women's bracelets. Little did they know, their lavish rules of status had just been hijacked by a 12-year-old orphan from the bottom of the social ladder. He took this despised piece of jewelry and brainwashed the world into seeing it as the ultimate symbol of masculine power, making the elites pour insane amounts of money into their own vanity. He executed a ruthless class reversal. And here is the coldest irony of all. While billionaires think they are buying a ticket to the absolute peak of the social hierarchy, this $100 billion luxury empire built on harvesting the rich is actually a non-profit charity that will never go public. 1893, Bavaria. 12-year-old Hans Wilsdorf lost both of his parents in rapid succession. The family hardware business, painstakingly built by his parents, was immediately liquidated by the relatives who took over his guardianship. The massive funds were locked away in a trust, and 12-year-old Hans was shipped off to a strict boarding school 25 miles away in Coburg, Germany. This disguised exile, stripping him of his family's core assets and sending him away, completely severed the orphan's emotional safety nets. Thrust into the brutal, oppressive hierarchy of his peers, he didn't break. Instead, he forged a cold, hyper-independent personality. He poured every ounce of his energy into obsessively studying numbers and languages. He rapidly mastered French and English, the official language of the British Empire which dominated global trade at the time. This became his ultimate survival card, laying the groundwork for him to cross borders alone and single-handedly hack into global commercial networks. 18-year-old Hans left school and headed to Geneva, Switzerland, to work as a lowly apprentice at a pearl export company. From this marginalized position, far removed from the center of power, he quietly observed and cracked the luxury industry's most guarded secret for massive profit. This massive pearl company didn't farm oysters. They didn't produce a single pearl. Instead, they relied entirely on centralized global sourcing, enforced ruthlessly strict grading standards, packaged them beautifully, and flipped them to top-tier jewelers worldwide. By discarding heavy manufacturing and strictly controlling the global supply chain, high entry barriers, and brand packaging, Hans experienced a massive commercial awakening. A year later, leveraging his multilingual skills, 19-year-old Hans jumped ship to Kuno Korten, a top-tier watch exporter in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, working as an overseas correspondent and clerk. His monthly salary was a pathetic 80 Swiss francs, yet the company's annual exports exceeded 1 million francs. Beyond handling a massive volume of order letters from the Americas and Britain, Hans was forced to manually wind hundreds of pocket watches in the warehouse every single day, meticulously recording the second-by-second variations of each piece. This grueling, daily mechanical repetition ignited an almost pathological obsession with mechanical precision. This bottom-tier grunt work showed him the fatal technical flaws of every mainstream timepiece in the world, giving him the guts to bypass the entire system. In 1905, he decisively cashed out his trust fund, partnered with his brother-in-law Alfred Davis in London, and directly applied the Pearl Company's model. He placed the largest single order for top-tier wristwatch movements from Bienne, Switzerland, shipped them to Britain for assembly, and kicked off his empire with a massive gamble. To push a fringe product into the hands of the power class, you first need a symbol that can cross borders without friction. 27-year-old Hans ran through letter combinations like a human algorithm. His commercial parameters were punishing. A maximum of 5 letters, it had to sound exactly the same in every language on Earth, it had to be easy to spell, and most importantly, it had to look perfectly symmetrical when engraved on a tiny dial. He wrote down hundreds of meaningless 5-letter words, exhausting himself mentally. Then, on a London morning in 1908, Hans was riding on the upper deck of a horse-drawn omnibus. The carriage was inching its way down Cheapside, a loud, bustling financial artery of the city, surrounded by the clatter of hooves and wheels on cobblestone. Amidst the violent jolts of the carriage roof, Hans distinctly heard a genie whisper a made-up word into his ear. On July 2nd of that same year, he immediately registered it as a trademark in Switzerland. At the time, the watch industry had strict hierarchical rules. Only the names of elite retailers were allowed on the dial. Bottom-tier suppliers were absolutely forbidden to sign their work. Hans didn't fight them head-on. He used a Trojan horse strategy. Initially, for every 6 watches exported to British retailers, he secretly printed his own brand name on just one of the dials. After verifying that the market didn't reject it, he bumped the ratio to 2 out of 6, then 3. He boiled the frog with supreme patience, until he finally mandated that every single watch leaving his hands must have the dial, the case, and the movement stamped with that word whispered by the genie: Rolex. But the real chain of contempt lay in the technology. Old money men of the early 20th century only respected massive, heavy pocket watches. They vehemently rejected the wristwatch, believing the movements were too small, wildly inaccurate, and entirely incapable of handling even a slight shock. To them, it was just a fragile bracelet for women. To crush this bias, Hans opted for a technological strike from the top down. In 1914, he sent a tiny 25mm wristwatch directly to the Kew Observatory in Britain, the highest official testing facility under the National Physical Laboratory, known for its ruthless standards. This was a hardcore, 45-day hell test. The miniature watch was forced to run in 5 wildly different spatial positions and subjected to a loop of freezing temperatures, room temperature, and the intense heat of baking ovens. Before this, such extreme physical stress tests were exclusively reserved for massive brass marine chronometers bolted deep inside warships to survive the violent oceans. This was the life-or-death standard used by the British Royal Navy for naval navigation. The final report on July 15th left the British academic world speechless. After 45 days of torture designed for naval equipment, this pocket-sized watch maintained a daily variance of just +1 second. It scored a staggering 77.3 points, securing a Class A precision certificate. Hans took a product mocked by the elites as a lady's toy and successfully challenged the pride of the British Empire's naval navigation. He shattered the traditional barrier of the pocket watch with cold, hard official data. What permanently welded this precision instrument to hardcore masculinity was the fire of World War I. In the muddy, brutal trench warfare, officers realized that unbuttoning heavy winter coats to fish out a pocket watch during a freezing gas attack was a clumsy move that could get them killed. A wristwatch that could be read with a flick of the wrist became a tactical necessity for coordinating artillery and infantry. When battle-hardened veterans returned home wearing the trench watches that had survived the crossfire with them, the public's subconscious bias was instantly vaporized. Wearing a wristwatch was forcefully redefined as the mark of a combat-tested man. On September 3, 1935, Hans locked on to Sir Malcolm Campbell, the reigning king of speed. At the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, Campbell drove his aero-engine-powered Bluebird to break the land speed record at 301.12 miles per hour. Through the violent vibrations, blistering heat, and lethal danger of the run, a Rolex ticked perfectly on his wrist. This ultimate endorsement, for which Campbell refused to take a single dime in sponsorship fees, completely brainwashed the public into viewing the wristwatch as the ultimate gear for pushing human limits, conquering nature, and controlling power. Just as the brand was climbing the ladder through technology and war, the established rules bit back. In 1919, to pay off massive war debts, the British government slapped a punishing 33% tariff on imported luxury goods and imposed brutal export taxes on gold and silver used for watch cases. This double taxation noose was about to strangle the profit margins of his London operation. Faced with this system designed to drain bottom-tier startups, Hans showed absolute ruthlessness. Overnight, he uprooted his London headquarters of over a decade, abandoned Britain entirely, and relocated the entire operation across borders to the watchmaking hub of Geneva, Switzerland. This forced escape actually cemented his absolute centralization of power. During the chaotic transition, he decisively used his massive capital to buy out all the shares owned by his brother-in-law. On January 17, 1920, the now sole dictator Hans registered a brand new joint stock company with the Swiss government, erasing the legal traces of his British startup and executing a class leap into purebred Swiss watchmaking aristocracy. Even more ruthlessly, he deployed his funds to buy equity in the Exile movement factory in Bienne, Switzerland. Using the relocation as leverage, he locked down deep capital ties to the upstream source of his core technology. Even with precision and pedigree secured, human weakness remained the biggest vulnerability. In 1926, Hans created the first waterproof oyster watch, relying on a screw-down crown to seal the case. But mechanical watches back then required daily manual winding. Every morning, users would unscrew the crown, wind it, and then, out of laziness or forgetfulness, fail to screw it back down tightly. Moisture and dust rushed right in. Frequent operation also accelerated the physical wear of the metal threads. This revolutionary waterproof system was being destroyed by sheer human laziness. To patch this fatal flaw, Hans ordered the development of an automatic system. In 1931, the semicircular Perpetual rotor was born, sitting right in the center of the movement. It could rotate 360 degrees freely, riding on the slightest movement of the wrist to provide a 35-hour power reserve. Manual winding was terminated. The screw-down crown became a vault door that only needed to be opened on rare occasions. He successfully engineered a physical lock against water intrusion by simply bypassing human error. But the climax of this class takeover was executed through a brutal, real-world test. On October 21, 1927, Mercedes Gleitz, a 26-year-old British typist and swimmer, hung a 9-carat gold octagonal oyster watch around her neck and spent over 10 hours swimming through the freezing, violent waters of the English Channel. Against extreme cold, strong currents, and saltwater corrosion, the micro-sealed cabin of the watch case didn't let in a single drop of water. It was the first absolutely successful underwater stress test in watchmaking history. Exactly 1 month later, Hans dumped 40,000 francs in cold, hard cash to buy the entire front page of the Daily Mail, orchestrating a massive visual bombardment. He issued a hardline directive, completely tearing down the traditional luxury displays of velvet cushions in high-end boutiques. Every authorized dealer was forced to place real, water-filled fish bowls in their street-facing display windows. Live goldfish swam around while the highly expensive watch was dropped straight to the bottom of the tank, subjected to 24/7 physical submersion. The luxurious velvet was violently ripped away, replaced by raw, primitive live water testing. The old-money aristocrats who once dismissed watches as cheap trinkets stood on the street staring at goldfish swimming over the dials, completely stunned. The century-old consensus that precision machinery died in water was blown to pieces by a crude glass bowl. Absolute pragmatism destroyed hypocritical decency, and massive wealth began pouring into the pockets of the former Orphan. And this was just the beginning of an even larger harvest of power. In 1939, war engulfed Europe again. When captured British Royal Air Force pilots had their watches looted by Nazi guards, Hans Wilsdorf took action. Leveraging the Geneva Convention's rule allowing POWs to receive Red Cross parcels, he established a cross-border credit pipeline. He allowed British prisoners to write directly to Geneva to order the latest watches, setting a strict rule. No payment was required during the war. They would settle the bill only after the Allies crushed the Nazis and the POWs returned home to a paycheck. On March 10, 1943, Corporal Clive James Nutting, locked inside Stalag Luft III, wrote a letter ordering a stainless steel Oyster chronograph 3525, priced at a steep 350 Swiss francs. Hans approved the zero-interest order. The watch quickly became a crucial timing instrument for plotting an escape. On August 4th, RAF squadron leader Gerald Imison received the same model. Equipped with tachymeter and telemeter scales, the watches were used for secret calculations. On the night of March 24, 1944, the Great Escape at Stalag Luft III was triggered. Crawling through the dark, muddy tunnel named Harry, the POWs used their chronographs to time the patrol intervals of the Nazi guards above, precisely controlling the movement of the 76 men making the break. In the mud, just yards away from armed guards, this mechanical watch controlled the lifeline of the entire escape. After the war, Corporal Nutting returned to Britain and received his invoice. Due to strict post-war currency controls, he settled the life-or-death debt for a mere £15. The physical evidence of this transaction, based entirely on honor, survived. Nutting's watch, along with Hans's signed sales receipt and their correspondence, sold at auction in 2007 for £66,000. Today, even undocumented POW models fetch up to $400,000. It proved the historical penetrating power of Hans's wartime gamble. Before the smoke of war even cleared, Hans's commercial empire was already cutting into the down market. On March 6, 1946, he officially established Montres Tudor S.A. 20 years prior, he had quietly registered the Tudor name. Now fully independent, Hans laid out a clear, tiered pricing strategy. Build a watch that dealers could sell at a lower price point, but with the exact same standards of waterproofing and shock resistance, precision targeting the budget-conscious middle class. The 1952 Tudor Oyster Prince executed this playbook perfectly. Hans handed down his two core patents, the waterproof Oyster case and the Perpetual automatic winding rotor. To slash costs, Tudor skipped in-house movements and bought mass-produced base calibers from third parties, heavily modifying them. They packaged a third-party engine inside a top-tier original case, complete with Rolex engravings on the caseback. This combo blew profit margins wide open. That same year, Hans sponsored the British North Greenland expedition, strapping 26 Tudor watches onto the wrists of scientists working in brutal glacial conditions for months. Tudor's ads entirely ditched tennis courts and golf courses. Instead, they plastered extreme close-ups of coal miners deep underground and rescue divers in brutal waters, hammering away in high-stress environments. This raw, unpolished reality check shattered consumer hesitation in the mid-tier market. Armed with hardcore data, Tudor secured military contracts with the French Navy, eating up the tool watch market entirely. Just as the brand reached the absolute peak of the industry, Hans faced his ultimate reckoning. In 1944, his first wife passed away. They had no children. This meant that upon his death, the massive empire he had built would become prey for capital markets, destined to be carved up, taken public, and stripped of its control. On August 1, 1945, Hans registered the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. Before his death in 1960, he executed his final will, transferring 100% of the company's shares to the foundation. Under airtight Swiss foundation law, the company was legally barred from ever being sold, broken up, taken public, or acquired by any rival. This ultimate equity lockdown completely blocked out financial oligarchs. It became the only mega-corporation on Earth that never has to pay shareholder dividends, never publishes financial reports, and never reveals global sales figures. Every drop of after-tax profit goes straight into the foundation's vault. Operating as an independent entity, the company pays massive corporate taxes to the canton of Geneva, acting as its largest taxpayer. But the core profits are paid out as dividends to the foundation. Sitting on a mountain of cash, the foundation aggressively buys up prime real estate globally. In a stroke of ruthless irony, one of its landmark buildings in London's core commercial district is leased directly to Patek Philippe, its top competitor, acting as Patek's only official flagship store in the UK. This non-profit charity has been legally and continuously extracting massive rent checks from its biggest rival. Under its current leadership, the foundation distributes its immense wealth with the secrecy of an intelligence agency. No public asset totals, no disclosure of single donation amounts, and no complete list of beneficiaries. The money is fiercely locked within the canton of Geneva. It dumps massive amounts of no-strings-attached cash into the pockets of top graduates from local design and architecture schools. It continuously bails out local food banks, institutions for the blind, and nursing homes for the elderly on the brink of bankruptcy with massive, bottom-line financial injections. The billionaires at the top of the pyramid fiercely bid in auction houses for rare dials. The newly rich try to buy their way into elite status symbols with cold, hard cash. But they have no idea that the insane amounts of money they drop to project their power are ultimately converted into meals for Geneva's blind and beds for abandoned elders. This fringe accessory, once mocked by old money as a woman's bracelet, was weaponized by an orphaned outcast into the perfect blade to harvest the rich. Just when the elites think they have bought a ticket to the top of the food chain, this $100 billion luxury empire has already pulled off the ultimate capital disappearing act.